Hey friends, how you going? Mark Hummer of course again today. What I'm doing is talking about some Nikon products that I've had recently purchased, and I just thought I'd run you through how I felt about them and my experience. Now usually when I'm doing these videos I'm filming with my lighting at 100% level. I'm using my Z6, which I am now, but I often use a 50mm prime lens, and I usually have that set at say f3.2 or f2.8, and I find that gives a good composition. But I thought I'd try something a little different today. See, the first thing you may notice is that there is no microphone directly in front of me. 9 times out of 10 I've always had the microphone in a stand right in front of my face. But I thought I'd try something new today. So now I've got the Nikon Z6 just about 2 or 3 feet closer than what I would have used the 50mm lens position, and I put a 35mm prime on it. So I've got the 35mm S lens for the Nikon Z system on right now, and I thought I'd film myself with that, shooting at actually f1.8 to see what sort of a shallow depth of field I get with that. I don't expect it to be remarkable, but I am interested to see at 1.8 how does the lens hold up with keeping me in focus, and also how does it hold up in its look and general distortion, because with all these straight lines behind me, as you can see, any distortion is greatly exaggerated. But I've got it at a good position, at a good plane, close to my eye level, and I have had a bit of an investigation to make sure it looked pretty tidy, so I'm quite confident it's great. Now what is most interesting about that is by shooting at 1.8, well, not only do you get a brighter image, and it should be a nice shallow depth of field, proportional for a 35mm lens, which is a little bit wide, but I'm using my lights now, the same lights I've always used, but I've had to put them down to 50%. So it's quite a light saving, and I thought that was an interesting point to illustrate with you, that by coming in a bit closer with a wider angle lens, it may not be quite so flattering in the face because you get a little bit of distortion. But what you do is save a lot of light power. Now it's not the cost of the electricity I'm talking about, but just sometimes you don't have a lot of powerful light with you. So by bringing the camera in, as they say, having it at a shallower depth of field and a brighter image, and then turning your lights down or having the lights, whatever adequate lighting you have to utilise, you can do so and it'll still be an effective image. So we'll have a look at that and investigate it later, the comparison. So starting off with that, and I'll do some 35mm imaging just to give you an illustration of how it comes across differently. Now right now I've got a whole lot of lenses and cameras on the table. I've got my Z7 here, as you can see, and on the Z7 there is the 85mm S lens. Now it's a great lens for portraiture. I do really enjoy it, and what I like about it is of course the silent autofocus, the fact that it's very good at gaining the focus. I've found that it's very reliable. In fact, even I've had an experience just recently where I was doing some portrait photography, and because of the situation, the subject was up high on a little rock shelf and I was down low in a dark area, and I just couldn't get elevated up high enough to be at an equal plane. So what I had to do is, rather than get a ladder or some other apparatus, I simply elevated the camera above my head, and using the tilty screen that you do, I was able to get focus by simply tapping on the subject and then nailing focus that way. So that actually I found was extremely good and reliable. I was actually surprised. I thought tapping the screen for focus like you do with a mobile phone, I thought, oh, it's probably going to focus on its nose or the ears, or I'm not going to get it exactly on the eye where I want. But as long as I took a few photos, like 2 or 3 times I did it just to make sure I was actually nailing the eye, I found when I examined the images later, they were spot on and it was brilliant. So that's a really doable thing that you can rely on. Just take a few images to make sure you're confident that when you did tap it, you actually did tap it exactly on the eye. As long as you do that, you will gain focus and it'll look great. So I just wanted to share that bit of information, that I have allowed an extra confidence in those new S lenses and the ability to use that wonderful little flippy screen for when angles are awkward. It does work well as a great combination. The other thing I was using on that day was the new, new for me anyway, I've just bought this 105 1.4 G lens. It's the old G series lens, and I've tried that on this Nikon Z7 for doing portraits. Now why wouldn't I just use the 85? Well, because it's a little bit longer, you get a little bit better compression, and also of course you get a shallower depth of field. And of course Nikon just have not released anything that's equal to that yet for the S series line of lenses, so I had to make do with what was currently available. Now I was a little bit nervous, as you do when you're using what is not a designed lens exactly for that modification of camera. You think, well, perhaps I might have some issues with it, it might not focus well. Well, actually no, it was fabulous. Every photo I took on that day, and I probably took 120 photos. I would say there were 2 outings, one with a young man, a gentleman, and one with a young lady. and I found that on both occasions, with over 100 photos taken just with this lens alone, 95 of them were sharp as a tack and in focus. And any ones that weren't were not the fault of the lens or the camera, it was just my fault. I just didn't make the adjustments appropriate. So sometimes I'm going to move or the subject moves, that's no fault of the equipment. And that's probably what happened. But 95 hit rate for any photographer, that's really good. And when I say in sharp, I mean right on the eyeball sharp when you zoom in 200%, and it was spot on. So I actually really like this lens. I was shooting a lot at 1.4, which is, if you're doing a close-up headshot, pretty much forget it. It's so shallow, you're getting like, just the eyeball and the eyelashes out of focus. It's really too shallow for a close-up headshot. It's a great lens for doing headshots, don't get me wrong. Use it, but just use it at 2.8 or 3.2 or f4 or something if you're going to get into just a tight little crop of a shot, getting in close. Otherwise the depth of field is like ludicrous and the photo actually looks ugly. So yeah, by choosing your right f-stop, you'll actually do really well with it. But don't think you have to shoot everything at 1.4 just because it can. Now, in context though of that, I was also doing some shots where I was taking photos of full body shots or even half body shots. But even for a full body shot at 1.4, not only were able to nail focus and compose quite well, providing you got back enough, but the beauty of it was you get a really shallow depth of field behind the subject. So the whole subject's pretty much sharp or in focus, or at least 50% of their face is, which is enough for the shot. But it was nice to really blur out the background. Now on that subject, there is another option. If you really want to destroy the background and yet get maximum amount of subject in focus, what you can also do is you can take two photos identically at the same time. So you're holding the camera up, you shoot it at say your 1.4 to get the nice blurry background, and then immediately, don't let the subject move, you let them know in advance what's going to happen. So I'm going to take 3 photos, take the shot at 1.4 for that blurry background, then immediately take the photo at 2.8 and then immediately adjust it to shoot it again at f4. And then what you can do is you can choose which ones you wish to merge together in Photoshop, so you've got the ultimate sharp person but then the ultimate blurry background. And by merging those two together, you get the best of both worlds. So, that way you don't have to think, oh yeah, but it's so shallow, I'm only getting the eyeball in focus. You can still get the whole body in focus, you just got to merge those two photos together, the ones that you prefer. I wouldn't recommend you merge all 3, that's not necessary. Just pick the 2 that you're most happy with. So that's another option to keep in mind and consider. I think that's a useful tip. The other thing I wanted to mention was my most recent acquisition, was this one here, which is the G lens, again, like this one here, that's an E lens actually, but you know what I mean, it's for the old F-mount. This F-mount lens here, which is the 20mm 1.8 G lens. And this is an excellent wide angle lens. Now why would I buy this and not an S lens? Because they haven't released the 20mm yet. And even though they have the 24 out, the 24 is not a focal length that I'm interested in any way. If I want to go a little longer, I'll use my 35, which I'm actually shooting with now, That's a pretty good lens for getting a bit of a shallow depth of field and getting a bit of a tighter wide angle look. But if I want ultra wide, I'm going to use the 20mm prime. And even though I have owned the 14 to 30mm f4, and I've owned the 17 to 35 D lens before, which did actually work on the on the Z mount camera, surprisingly, with the FTZ adapter. Even though it's a D lens, it does have the silent wave motor inside as well, so that will function perfectly well, the 17 to 35 D lens on the Z system cameras. So just sort of pop that one in there. It is very efficient. But what I did find with these zooms, and there's nothing wrong with them, zooms were sharp, they're efficient, they worked. The reason I'm choosing a prime is simply that it gives me that much bigger aperture, which I like for brightness, especially in dark, in confined spaces. But also, I just like the 20mm focal length. I find that I didn't ever use the 14 very often at all. In fact, maybe only 5 or 10% of the time would I ever go to 14, and that was only because I could, not because I really needed to. And then as far as the longer length of that, 30-35mm, if I needed that, I would just use my 35mm prime. So I found, what's the point of these zooms anyway? The wide zooms just didn't work for me, or didn't really be a good fit. So I've gone with 2 primes. As I say, right now I'm using this 1.8G prime on the FTZ adapter, which I might add works spectacularly. Works extremely well. I was surprised. I thought, wow, a 20mm at 1.8 doing video, for example, I thought I was never going to follow or track well. But no, it did. It actually nailed the focus on me, which I have test sample footage of, and I can show you. As I was moving around the room, it just had focus on me all the time and never lost me, and it was brilliant. And the image was magnificent, really nice, sharp, clean image. So I'm very actually pleased with that. It's almost like there's really no need to even get the S version when it comes out, but you know, I'll weaken. I know that when it does come out, I'll get it. Only because that's the whole reason of having the Z system, isn't it? It's all about the integrity of the engineering. The engineering is vastly superior with a mirrorless system. You know, you got that big flange mount, you got the short distance from sensor to lens, so you get, that's engineering brilliance, and that's what I want to work with. So when that lens does come out and it's available, undoubtedly I will get it, and I'll probably sell that. I mean, I got that second hand for a very reasonable price, so selling it again, I'm only going to sell it for what I bought it for, so I'll lose nothing. I'm interested to know how the sound works today. That'll be an interesting experience because I'm using the Deity microphone now as a shotgun mic on top of the camera. And the reason I'm using that and not having the microphone on the table is simply just to have the experience of knowing how it works, to see if I can get away with it and at what distances. This is a bit of a prototype experiment on the sound quality and just how it all comes across. So I'm hoping it works pretty well. I know at least the microphone works well when it's close, but then every microphone does that, doesn't it? So let's give it a nice interesting test, see how it works on the camera itself. And I would say the camera would be 5 feet or just over 1.5 meters away from me right now. So that sort of gives you a ballpark figure. I have the microphone set at the level 8 on the actual microphone. The microphone has its own little wheel of adjustment of volume, that's on level 8, and internally in the camera I've got it on the sensitivity of 12 out of 20 in camera. So that 8 and 12 system, well, we'll see how that works out and if it's satisfactory. So other than that, I've really got a little more to say right now. I will give you the test footage. I'll merge that in where you'll see both the 20mm working, you'll see the 35mm working, and a comparative 50mm angle and shot, and see how that all looks. And we'll compare them together and see what's the best alternative, eh? So we're back again. Hi guys, Mark here of course, and we were talking about now the various lens choices that I've been using with this new Z system. And what I've done for you now is I've just made some adjustments to accommodate for the 50mm lens that I'm using now in the Z6. So I've moved it back, it's probably 2.5 meters now away from me, the camera, using the 50mm S lens, which is almost identical to this, only that it's a little bit longer in focal length. This is the 35 here that I was using just a few minutes ago. So yes, I have that and it works great. Now with these, just as a point of interest, and it's a minor point, but what I do is I always use filters. You might see here that there is a filter. I always have the circular polarizer filter on all my lenses at any given time. So as you can see here, we've got another filter on this one, and all of them have the filter on as a standard thing. The reason I leave them on the lenses, the circular polarizers, is because you can actually reduce the quantity of the darkness or brightness just by a quick turn. But secondly, if they're on, I'll remember to have them with me. If I don't have them on the lens, I'll forget to use them. And then of course you get all that extra glare and, you know, white out, and it just looks terrible outside images anyway. So it's easy to take them off, but it's terrible when you forget to bring them and then you've got to go and try and find them. So yeah, I just leave them on a standard, just as a bit of a tip. Some people use the clear filters, clear UV filters as a protection layer. I tend to not use clear filters anymore because I feel that they're valueless. They don't actually serve any function. Sure, they might protect the glass at the front, but they don't serve a value. These protect the glass in the front of the lens, but at least they serve a function as a polarizing filter. So that's useful. So just that's a little tip that I just thought I'd project to you. Now, so I'm using the 50mm lens now, and I've stopped shooting at 1.8. Because it's a 50mm, you get a shallower depth of field anyway, proportionally. So I've moved it back and I've increased it to, I think it was 2.8, f2.8. So we've decreased the aperture a little bit, shrunk that down, and what I've done to compensate for the less light is I've increased my lights again up a bit more. So with the 35 very close at 1.8, I had the lights at only 50%. Now I've got my ring lights at 75%, both of them. So it was just that balance, you know, a little bit darker in the f-stop value, so a little bit brighter in the light, and it all equals out the same. I'm not a big fan for using ISO to do that. You can, of course, simple flick of the button on the camera to increase the ISO, make it a little bit brighter or darker, but I prefer to leave it always at native ISO where at all possible and just increase or decrease the lighting, simply because I have the luxury of doing that, and I think that the lower the ISO, usually the better resolution of the image is. So I just thought I'd show you the difference in the footage and particularly the volume of the sound, because now the microphone is a little bit further away. I have no doubt at all I'm sounding maybe a little bit more echoey and probably not as clear or as loud. So I'll maybe do some minor adjustments in post just to make it audible and about the same. So that's one thing I'll do for you in a minute. The other thing I just wanted to mention is have a look at the wall behind me. You may notice it's compressed in a bit more because we're using a different focal length. So even though the layout is very similar, you may notice now that you don't see that little flag, if you like, or banner in the corner, because just of the compression shrinks that background in, which is usually why I use a longer focal length whenever possible for that beneficial compression, which I think looks much better. Looks much better and you get less distortion in those lines. Looks better on the face because it's not protruding the nose forward and the ears back, which is what a wide-angle lens does. So where impossible, I'm just encouraging everybody to use a longer focal length where reasonable and when it's practical to do so, because you get a much more flattering image on the subject in yourself. I understand if you're doing a selfie, that's not practical. If I was going to do a selfie, I'd be using that 20mm prime, but I'm not doing a selfie, am I? I've got it on a tripod and a ball head, and I'm able to comfortably set it up how I want. Speaking about focal lengths, as it were, and I was illustrating these various lenses, and I was talking to you the difference between, say, well, I'm using the 50 now, I have the 85 here, I have 105, I got a 20 and a 35, so I've got all these different focal lengths. When it comes to portraits, what do I recommend? Well, I always recommend that I start off with the 85, hence it's on the Z7 right now. So 85 is my ballpark starting lens for any portraits that I do. And that's particularly with things like upper torso body shots or head shots, and I go with that and we'll see how it looks. And if I need to get back further, or I'm in a tight location where I just simply can't get that shot of the subject, I'll use a 50mm maybe. So 50mm will be my go-to if the 85 is too long, and if I can get away with it, I think I can get back far enough, I'll definitely go the 105, because the 105 just a little bit more compression, a little bit more flattering on the face. So don't be shy in always going in a longer focal length. Many people will use a 70 to 200, and that's a great idea in as far as that you get that range variety without swapping lenses. So yeah, if you're in a tight location, you can use 70, that's usually pretty reasonable, and of course you go all the way up to 200 if you can get back far enough. A 200mm length at f2.8 will look exactly like, say, an 85 does at 1.8. So you don't think you're missing out anything there. If you can get back, that 2.8 is still going to look magnificent and have a beautiful soft background. And of course the compression will be fantastic. So I'm not in any way ditching on zoom lenses for portrait. I'm just saying that I find the comfortableness of how lightweight prime lenses are. That's a definite advantage. Of course it does come across a bit ludicrous when you talk about this beast, because this is very heavy. But that's a niche lens. It's a lens I use not for every shot, but for when I can to get a certain look. As I say, 9 times out of 10 I'm using this 85mm prime, and it does a wonderful job, and it's so light. It's just not a burden to take around, which 24 to 70 or a 70-200 is. They are very heavy and they get tiresome. So have something like this, or a 70-200 you can put on when you need it. That's a great idea, but I wouldn't be carrying it around all day. As an all-round lens, I'm going to be using the 85 for 90% of my portrait work. And demonstrate its follow focus capabilities. Now you will hear a little bit of grinding and wheezing going on because the microphone's right on top of the lens. It's a shotgun mic, but it will pick up some of the noises. I appreciate, of course, when I'm using this lens for Ronin work, Steadicam style activity, that I'm not really using a microphone anyway for anything else other than just recording the data or the day or time or situation. Really what I'm doing is I'm usually putting a music overlay over it anyway, so you don't actually hear the actual original soundtrack, and if I need any audio, I'll record that audio separately or with a microphone on a pole somewhere, so it's not actually on top of the camera anyway, because I want optimum sound. But anyway, this is just for demonstration purposes, so please put up with the little clicks and wheezes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move around very slowly. I'll make sure the camera's actually got focus on me, and then what I'll do is I'll move back and forth, up and down, and you can just tell me for yourself if you're happy with that autofocus performance on the Z6 with this 20mm 1.8G lens with the FTZ adapter. Appreciate it is on the 1.8 setting, so it's on its shallowest depth of field, so that's its ultimate test really, isn't it? I mean, everything's going to be in focus if it's f5.6, but at f1.8 that'll be an interesting test for its performance. So I'm going to move around and you can see how we go, okay? Now of course it's quite a bright image at 1.8, so I've turned my lighting down to 50% from what I normally have it, and that's just to compensate for the wide aperture and the close proximity. So let's see how we go. I'm going to start moving around, we'll see how it works. Coming in close, and going back. Going to move right over to the side, moving forward and across the camera. I'll move back into the corner. Now I can hear it certainly doing something. I can hear the clicking and wheezing, so I know the autofocus is active. Whether or not it's locking onto me or not, well, will remain to be seen. Now what I'm going to do is just do a few bob up and downs. Face completely out of frame, I believe. Then I'm going to pop up and see how it catches me. Again, pop down and pop up. Move to the side, turn around, so my back's facing it, there's no face. Of course, face detect is on, so it's looking for a face. Let's hope it's acquiring me nice. I'm going to bob down again and out, and then up and pop in. Okay, turn around again, bob down, so it's sort of lost me, then come around and see how quickly it catches me. Rightio guys, so I think that's enough of a test. It's either got me or it hasn't. I'm pretty confident it has, because I've tried this test before and it worked really well. And of course, you know, you've got favourable conditions here. We've got reasonably good lighting. I'm in a reasonably close proximity, and of course a bit of contrast going on with the white wall and my skin and hair colour. So hopefully should be picked up well. I'm interested to see the test myself. I think it'll be fascinating, and also the sound with the shotgun mic actually on the camera, where usually I don't use that. I use it on an extension with a cable. But let's see how we go. I will say this though, I am buying a remote receiver for the microphone, so what I can do is I can have it anywhere in the room or location, and it just will wirelessly transmit the signal. So that'll be interesting to see how that works for me. I'm sure that'll be a vast improvement than all these cables that I've been tripping over for so long. But when I get that, I'll let you know all about it.